Hello and welcome to The Layman and the Brewer. Today joining me on the kegs is Mark and Dave from Two Thumb Brewing Company here in Christchurch. Thanks for coming along, guys.
Hey, thanks for having us.
You're welcome, good to be here.
Pleasure to have you. Kick us off, what's your background? You're quite possibly two of the newest brewery owners and brewers in the country. Very recent acquisition of Two Thumb, so what were you up to before this?
Oh, our history, mine and Dave's history goes back 30-ish years, more than we'd like to count, really.
36-ish, I think.
We're both musicians, back in the UK, both from the same town. Both of us shared the same best man, so he's a mutual friend, who also played in a band. And then Dave went off and lived in Botswana for 15 years, and we both found ourselves in Christchurch and hooked up and started playing in a band again and started brewing. And that's where we got to taking over Two Thumb eventually.
And that was just home brewing?
Home brewing, yeah, just home brewing, just always loved really good beer. And really enjoyed making it. Never thought we'd take over a brewery, but here we are.
Yeah, so I've been brewing since I was about 19. Essentially, my dad bought me the first kit because he used to brew a little bit, and that was really just to tide me through the student years because couldn't really afford beer, and so I had an excuse to have the parties in my dorm. But then, yeah, as Mark said, when I had to go to Botswana, too hot to brew, so essentially just took a bit of a break from it there. I did try a couple of times, but I just couldn't get it right. And then coming over to New Zealand, ended up just taking it up again. Yeah, then when Mark came over, we went, actually, it's good fun. You can make beer as good as you can on the in the shelves. And actually, at that time, for me, 10, 11 years ago, better than you got in most of the supermarkets and on the shelves. So just really picked it up and started to ramp it up again. So yeah, home brewers for a long time, but coming from Yorkshire, obviously enjoyed a good pint for many, many years before making it ourselves. So yeah, and then ended up with Two Thumb. Chance, really.
Real chance. We regularly go to beer tastings around town and quite regularly go to the one at Ilam. And we tasted the Two Thumb beer there, I think, the first time.
It was the pale ale.
The pale ale. And just went, oh, that's a good beer. And saw it a couple of other places, tried a couple of others, and consistently good. And it was just by chance. We're drinking it.
We've both been talking about starting up our own business, doing something with our brewing, because we got to the stage where we were brewing quite regularly and brewing really good beer. So how do we take the home brewing to the next level? We've got a few ideas about dealing with something like that. Yeah, and then
we're just out actually at the Civil and Naval in Littleton drinking Two Thumb beer, and I just said, if this brewery ever came up on the market, I think we might have to buy it. And then 2 weeks later, up it pops on the market. So we couldn't not do it, could we?
It was a pretty quick transition too, I hear.
Yeah, we were. I think it took us a month from deciding to buy it, maybe 6 weeks, from deciding to buy it to actually walking in on day one and brewing the first brew.
Yeah, and we kept the previous owner, Clayton, and we kept him on contract to ensure the quality and the standard of the beer, and the recipes were all exact because we liked the beer so much we didn't want to change it, so you don't fix what's not broken. So essentially we made sure that we were still hitting that right level. So again, the transition from the home brew, the partial mash and the all grain home brew, and then moving into the bigger kit was essential for us to make sure we got it right. Especially
being home brewers and not coming from a commercial brewery background, we needed to make sure we'd got all the processes in place to make sure that quality was still there. So Clayton was great in that handover process actually, and still we're still on call if we've ever got any questions about maintaining that core quality, which I think is really important.
So obviously coming from a home brew background and then moving into a fully set up commercial situation, that's got to be a bit of a challenge with some steep learning curves in there. How did that go?
It was a steep learning curve walking in on day one and going, right, we're brewing some beer today.
Not just a beer, we actually brewed the Hop Helmet. If you don't know if you know our beers, that is the big 7%, very full-on IPA. So it was not just a little beer, it was a big beer.
In at the deep end. It's scale, really. It's, I mean,
the process is the same.
The process is...
You know, there's only 4 ingredients. You do it right, you're following the same process. You instead of having 1 vessel or 2 vessels, you've got 4, but essentially it's a very similar process. And so we knew enough of what we were doing to actually understand the use of all the equipment, to make the scale up easy enough. But still, moving beer around with pumps and the sanitisation of all of that rather than with buckets. And that was the biggest thing.
But that was another reason why throughout the transition and the due diligence that we did with Clayton, we were really clear that we needed to keep his input for at least a short period of time, because we were acutely aware that we're not from a commercial brewing background, so we don't profess to know it all, but it was important to keep that link, I guess, with the past.
Yeah, because we want to still be able to drink our beer at home as well. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So with your background in home brewing and now commercial brewing, if you could grab any beer, past or present, from the fridge, what tickles your taste buds? What do you go for?
If it was one of ours, most beers actually depends on the time of day, depends on how I'm feeling, whatever. But if it was one of ours, I'd probably at the moment be going for the red rye IPA. Always like a good red ale, always have done. It's quite full-bodied, but it does have that hop hit at the end. But I don't think the hops overshadow the malts that come through. The red malts are really nice.
How about you, Mark?
Well, I'm not going to choose one of ours. I'm going to. I think go back to a good Yorkshire bitter, which I don't think we see enough of in New Zealand.
We don't.
But interestingly, one of the first beers that we brewed when we took over Two Thumb was a very small batch of a good Yorkshire bitter as a bit of a tribute to our background, really, which went on at the Handpull festival at the Twisted Hop and went really well. In fact, they've come back and asked us several times to do it again. So I think next year we're gonna do a real hand-pulled Yorkshire bitter and put that on the range. But I'd go for that.
Nice. While we're on there, just what's the key differences between a hand pull beer and a normal carbonated beer off the tap? Where do you get those differences in there?
Well, I guess the Kiwis always take a little bit of mickey out of us English for liking warm flat beer, but it is that lack of carbonation. But you get the air pushed through the beer at the point of serving it, so that it's that gives it the freshness as opposed to a carbonation in a bottle.
Yeah, generally, a carbonated beer, it tends to accentuate the bitterness. So a lot of people like really cold beer, and you don't really want to have a really cold hand pull beer anyway. So if you want really cold beer, it should be carbonated. It does accentuate the bitterness a bit, but you don't get the creaminess. You lose the creaminess because it's fizzy, essentially. Where a good Yorkshire bitter, a good hand pull, you're dragging it up from the cellar with your muscles. It's coming up through there, and then the nozzle, you get the nozzle right, mixes really nicely, nice smooth foamy head. It's just a different experience. Much nicer.
So, I know you guys have only just taken over and it's still very, very early days now, but anything interesting that you've got in your back pocket for the future of Two Thumb?
Oh, we've got quite a few things in our back pocket at the moment.
Lots of ideas.
Yeah, probably too many things, really. Well, a couple of key things for next year. One, you'll start to see a bit of a rebrand, so we're going to give the labels and the logos and all that sort of stuff a bit of a freshen up. So that'll come out early in the new year, and then really focusing on a program of seasonal beers. So at least every 2 months there'll be something new available in bottles and on tap, and depending on how the market goes, more often than that. But so they're the sort of two big things that we're gonna be changing next year.
I mean, the core range is really bread and butter. It's selling well. It's a really balanced, diverse range. You know, going from your Kolsch, your lager, Pilsner type light beers at one side through to your open stout at the other side. So that core range, I think, has hit the market really well. So the seasonal will just give us that edge. A lot of drinkers, well, what's new? What have you got on? So they want to see something new. So the idea behind the seasonals is have at least 6 that goes into supermarkets in the bars, as Mark said. And then we're also doing a bit of a calendar for specials that we'll produce just for the festivals and special one-offs and in the fillery. So get to the fillery, fill up, and you might see something new every couple of weeks.
So there's some interest out there about what might be a New Zealand beer, something that's very typically known as a New Zealand beer that we can potentially promote overseas in a really unique style. Do you have any ideas or thoughts on what would fit that bill?
Okay, it's a good question, really good question. And again, look, being from England, from the UK, we do have styles of beer which are typically English. Warm, flat beer generally, but Yorkshire beer, Yorkshire bitter, from where we come from. You got your brown ale, your Newcastle brown, from further up north, and so on. So I think there are advantages of having a specific brew. Uniquely New Zealand, we just did a kiwi fruit and coriander seed wheat beer, which could be deemed fairly unique with kiwi fruits. Not something I'll probably put as being a standard beer that you could sell more very widely. Well, we do a pale ale, New Zealand pale ale. We called it New Zealand pale ale because it uses New Zealand hops, four different New Zealand hops, 4 different New Zealand malts. Essentially, it's a really well balanced pale ale. There's a lot of pale ale out there, a lot of IPAs out there which are very, very hoppy. And I think that getting something that can showcase the uniqueness of the New Zealand hops. We've got fantastic New Zealand hops which are unique, and they've got some really good flavours in there. Again, our hop helmet only uses one hop, it uses the Nelson Sauvin hop. And so something that can showcase the uniqueness through either the malt or through the hops or a mixture of both, I think is something that is probably worthwhile pursuing. So for me, our New Zealand Pale Ale is probably around that style. Pale Ale is the biggest selling beer at the moment, and so something that is well-rounded, that easy to drink, but does showcase those hops and flavours. For me, that would be it.
I think it is a difficult question, because you think about, and we've said earlier that you tend to pick the beer according to the weather and the climate and the mood that you're in and what you happen to be doing that day, and there's such a variety from north to south of New Zealand of climate and weather and activity, and some mountainous regions and some subtropical regions. It's really difficult to pick one beer, but I think one thing that does have to come through out of a New Zealand promoted beer is its agricultural sort of heritage. So, New Zealand malts, New Zealand hops are world class. So we should be showcasing both of those things. Sometimes I think we go a bit too far down the hop route. There's fantastic hops in New Zealand, but we shouldn't forget the quality of the malts that we can brew beer with in New Zealand.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think it's a really difficult question, and I would hesitate to pick one particular style of beer, but whatever that is, I think New Zealand should be promoting itself on the quality of its ingredients, its water, its hops, and its malts.
Yeah. Perfect.
Okay. Well, I think that wraps it up for today. Once again, thank you both very much for coming in and joining us on the kegs and having a great chat.
Thanks, Abe. Good to see you.
Yeah, been good. Thanks.